I'm going to show you in this video how I use charcoal powder to shade the nose of this portrait. Now, most people will say that if you want to shade with charcoal, you start with charcoal and end with charcoal. But that's not how I do things. I start with what I'm comfortable with. That is the HB pencil. Now, the goal of the HB pencil is to try to pick out areas that you would consider to be shadows or mid-tones. At this point, you don't want to shade over where the highlights are. And of course, the next thing we do is we blend. I like to use tissue to blend. Some might recommend using cotton bud or blending stump, but I like tissue because tissue makes the shading very smooth. Then again, as I'm blending, you'll see that I'm avoiding blending over the highlights. Now, this next step is when I usually go in with my charcoal powder, but this nose still needs a bit more structure, so I shaded with the 2B pencil again. By shading with the graphite this second time, I'm better able to recognize areas that need to be shaded with charcoal later on. So you notice I'm not going straight with the charcoal powder. Rather, I build up tones first with my graphite pencils. Many people message me about why their drawings are not looking nice when they use charcoal powder. And it's probably because they don't start lightly with the graphite pencils, build up tones before they now use charcoal powder. Now, after blending the 2B pencil shading, we now get our charcoal powder ready. Now, you can just go ahead and shape the powder into a container. Nothing wrong with that. This is the method I've always used. But I found recently that it is a lot easier when you follow this other method. Now, what you do is that you grab a piece of paper and then you use your charcoal pencil to shade the paper. This will create some soft charcoal dust. Now, use your brush to scrub the charcoal dust from the paper. The benefit of using this second method rather than the other method is that the brush will only absorb a moderate amount of charcoal powder. On the other hand, the other method will soak in so much charcoal that if you're not careful, it can ruin the portrait. Now, you can forget all that I have said up until this point, but please take note of this important tip. When you want to shade with your brush filled with charcoal, make sure that you shade very lightly. At this first stage of the charcoal powder, please do not press your brush too much on the paper. Pressing too hard on your brush during the early stages of the drawing, it never ends well. You really just want to glaze over the paper lightly. And now, as you shade with the powder, also take note of where the shadows are. Usually with the nose, you would find that the shadows are toward the bottom part of the nose, the part that is hidden away from the light. If you also find that your shading is uneven, that is, it isn't as smooth as you want it to be, you can use your tissue to smoothen it out, as you can see me doing here. All that's left now is to add the finishing touches, making the areas that need to be darker, dark. And now, to finish things off, the icing on the cake, we create the shine. Take note that it isn't until I have finished shading everything else that I added the highlights. This way, I won't have to shade over it again. Now, the method I use to shade this nose is the same method I use to shade the rest of the face. Hit the playlist on the screen to learn more about my process for shading. Watch that. Yes, that. And I'll see you in the next one.